and welcome to episode 42 of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Hennig. On this edition of the podcast, we're going to talk about Joel Embiid's health and his future, my review of the new Spider-Man Far From Home movie trailer and what it means for the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and some thoughts on Klay Thompson. So let's open up a cold one and get started on episode 42 of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. Topic number one on this edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast: Joel Embiid, the Sixers superstar, is dealing with more health issues in the 2019 NBA playoffs. It started with the knee tendonitis issue that dates back to right after the NBA All-Star game. Then he had gastroenteritis a couple weeks ago, and now he has an upper respiratory infection, which Brett Brown, the Sixers head coach, referred to as a virus. Now, for any person, any one of those three ailments could be explained by a multitude of, maybe you ran into somebody who was sick, that's why you got their sickness, or maybe you're favoring one leg over the other, so you may wear down the one knee, so you may develop an overusage of that leg, or look, if you're eating the wrong foods, you may have a bad reaction to it. But for one person to have an issue with all three different types of ailments within a few months tells me that the problem for Joel Embiid goes much farther than just he has health issues. I'm starting to wonder if Joel Embiid is doing what is necessary to take care of his health, to be a professional athlete. I remember when LeBron James left the Cleveland Cavaliers and went to the Miami Heat. One of the things they do with the Miami Heat is their head executive, Pat Riley, checks the athlete's weight and body fat percentage every week because he believes that conditioning is extremely important in the NBA, and he believes that all of the guys who are on the Heat should be functioning at optimal athletic levels. And LeBron has said that because of his experience going to Miami Heat, it changed the way he viewed his diet. It changed the way he viewed his workout regimen. It changed how he viewed himself as an athlete. And I've heard other basketball players say something similar, whether it's CJ McCollum, whether it's Dame Lillard, whether it's Russell Westbrook, whether it's Steph Curry. There's numerous basketball players who have said over the years that they got to a point where they had to change their diet, they had to change their health regimen, they had to change their lifestyle in order to keep up with the demands of an NBA season. And for Joel Embiid, who is already a two-time NBA All-Star, All-NBA team, All-NBA defensive team, a guy who is, most people would agree, is one of the top 10 talents in the league today, at 24 years old, is having a multitude of health issues. And I can't help not to wonder how much of this is his own fault. You see, a lot of times in life, when you're that young, you think you're indestructible. You think no matter what happens, you're going to be okay. Nothing's going to bother you. You can play through anything, work through anything, fight through everything. And there comes a point where your body just starts breaking down. For some people, it's in their 20s. Some people, it's in their 30s. But we all have hit that point in our life where we realize, I can't do the same things that I used to. And I think for Joel Embiid, a guy who is an NBA player, a professional basketball player who plays between 70 and 90 games a year, a guy who trains in the offseason, standing at 7'2", a large human being, you have to take care of your body in a way that is different than other people. And it doesn't matter what Joel's friends do, what his girlfriend does, it doesn't matter. Joel has to customize his health and his diet and his lifestyle for his own physical needs. I look at him and I say, if it was just one of those issues, I would say, okay, it happens. Life goes on. But when you've had gastroenteritis multiple times in a 6-month period, when you have knee tendonitis and you get a upper respiratory infection, that tells me you're not doing enough to take care of your health. And there are a lot of things that are available to a professional athlete that may not be readily available to the average Joe, whether it comes to medical resources, health and nutritional resources, things that I think some people would love if they had the option to have. I don't know if Joel Embiid is fully maximizing it or if he is genuinely listening to the advice being given him. And that's what it really comes down to. It's not on the 76ers to keep Joel Embiid healthy. It's on the 76ers to present him with all the possible options to be healthy, and then it's on him to take advantage of those opportunities. I don't want to see Joel Embiid turn into the 21st century Bill Walton. I don't want to see a guy who's 24 years old become an on-again, off-again injury issue and health problem because he can't get his diet together, because he doesn't take enough vitamin C, because he doesn't eat enough oranges, because he doesn't do enough rest when he's not playing basketball. I don't know what it is. I don't know if he's not developed enough of a tolerance. I don't know if he's coming down with an autoimmune issue. I don't know if whatever the issue is that is leading to this, just basically a breakdown of his health overall. The medical and science community knows that whenever you have a GI tract health issue, that it does weaken your immune system. So I wouldn't be surprised if Joel Embiid got this upper respiratory infection as a backlash of him trying to come back from his GI tract issue too quickly. I also wouldn't be surprised if a guy who is well known for his love of Chick-fil-A sandwiches and milkshakes might not be getting enough vitamins and minerals in his daily diet. He may be getting enough protein and carbs, but he's not getting enough vitamins and minerals. These are things that have to be monitored by an athlete who's trying to maximize his physical ability to play the game of basketball, and especially in a long NBA season, getting to the playoffs. I don't think it's impossible for Joel Embiid to be healthy. I think the problem is Joel Embiid needs to make changes to his life and his diet and everything that goes on in his life to get more sleep, to eat better, to take care of his health in a more proficient way. You heard me mention Bill Walton. Bill Walton is a pro basketball Hall of Famer. He's arguably one of the 10 greatest college basketball players in college basketball history. When he came into the NBA, he was supposed to be the next big-time superstar, following in the lineage of former UCLA Bruin Lou Alcindor, who later changed his name to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Bill Walton was the next great center at UCLA, and when he came to the NBA, there were some questions about his health. Well, over the first 4 years of his NBA career, he never played more than 65 games. But over that time, he was elected to 2 All-Star games. He was an NBA champion, NBA MVP, and the Finals MVP. In fact, the year that his team won the NBA Finals, Walton didn't just play well, he played phenomenally well, scoring 18.2 points per game, through almost 3.5 blocks per game, 5.5 assists per game, and over 15 rebounds a game. He was an absolute force of nature. And at the time, most people believed that Bill Walton was arguably one of the most physically gifted and talented big men in all the league. But he couldn't stay healthy. As his career progressed, he had multiple injuries, including multiple foot injuries that took out 3 of the next 4 seasons of his career. And by the time he hit 30 years old, he was not as physically gifted, and he had to depend more on his basketball fundamentals and IQ, which he still was able to do, as he was still a productive player for a couple of years with the San Diego Clippers. He would later join the Boston Celtics, come off the bench, win one more NBA championship in a role that earned him NBA Sixth Man of the Year award. So Walton, for as talented as he was, his health wasn't able to hold up for a man his size and his health issues, especially with his feet. But yet, he is still arguably one of the most talented basketball players to ever play college or NBA basketball. He is still an NBA MVP, an NBA champion, an NBA Sixth Man of the Year, a Finals MVP. I don't want to see Joel Embiid turn into Bill Walton. And what's uncanny is that Joel Embiid is 24 years old right now in his third NBA season. In Bill Walton's third NBA season, he was also 24 years old. Walton was a unique and gregarious personality. Well, so is Joel Embiid. Both men have phenomenal physical athletic abilities. Both men have a much lighter physical touch and smoother footwork than most big men in the game at that time. While Bill Walton was playing in an era of big men, Joel Embiid is playing in an era where running up and down the court and shooting three-pointers is much more in vogue. So it's a much more unique proposition to say that in today's NBA, your best player is a 7-foot-tall player. But Joel Embiid, when he's on the floor, he's more than just the Sixers' best player. On many nights, he is the best player on the basketball court, period. And before the knee tendonitis issue came up, there could have been an argument made that he should be in the MVP discussion for the NBA this year. Whatever Joel Embiid has to do, I hope he cleans it up. I hate to see a talent like him go to waste when it comes to his physical abilities and his NBA potential just because of the fact that he's eating too much garbage and it's causing him to have gastrointestinal issues, or because he's not taking enough vitamins or getting enough sleep or spending enough time focusing on his overall health and not just rehabbing his body in order to get ready for every game. Look, rehab is important. Your physical conditioning is important, but at the same time, you have to let your body rest and heal. And I don't know if Embiid is doing enough, whether it's with his diet or whether it's with his lifestyle practices, to take care and optimize his physical health. Topic number 2 on episode 42 of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. Spider-Man Far From Home debuted their latest trailer, and it's arguably the most important trailer because previously, before Avengers Endgame came out, Marvel was very coy, they were very secretive, we're not going to give you all the details about the future of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Well, Spider-Man Endgame, while it's being branded as the final movie of Phase 3, I would argue it's much closer to an introduction to Phase 4 than it is an end of Phase 3, and here's why. In the movie, they start giving you details of what the world is like in the Marvel Cinematic Universe after Endgame. You see in the trailer that Spider-Man, he misses Tony Stark, he misses Iron Man, and Happy, Tony Stark's former best friend, tells Spider-Man, I don't think Iron Man would have sacrificed his life to save the world if he didn't think you were here to take his place. Basically insinuating that Peter Parker is going to become, in some ways, the next genius of the Marvel Universe, which isn't in line with the comic books. You know, in the comic books, Peter Parker does grow up, and his IQ is basically on the same level, almost, as Tony Stark in the comics. What people don't know is that in the comics, even though Spider-Man, for the majority of his run, is either a high schooler or college-aged young man, his intellect is far beyond just a normal teenager or high schooler. Part of it has to do with the fact that Spider-Man's intelligence allows him to be a superhero, but it's also his selflessness is something that, frankly, Tony Stark had to learn. He had to learn to be a hero. He had to learn to be sacrificial with his time and with his energy and how to appropriately do that. Peter Parker, whether it's in the comic book version or in the movie version, has been much more ready to be a hero and to sacrifice himself and his time for the greater good. And so the movie gives a little bit of a homage, a little bit of perspective on where Peter Parker stands, how much he misses Iron Man, how much he respects him, and how much he realizes that part of the movie gets into how is Spider-Man going to fill the void of a world without Tony Stark. You also get to introduce in the movie in more detail the villain of the movie, Quentin Beck, the villain Mysterio. Now, in the trailer, if you don't know that Mysterio is a villain, you're probably confused with what I'm saying right now. Just to give you a little background, Mysterio is one of the oldest Spider-Man villains, and he's actually one of the oldest Marvel villains altogether. He dates back all the way to the 1960s. Quentin Beck has always been a very manipulative individual, whether he's having to go up against Spider-Man, whether he's going up against the X-Men, whatever his role is, Mysterio has always been a character that is manipulating everyone around him on some level. You see, Mysterio's powers are not what they're presented like in the movie. I think it's being purposely presented this way because they want the audience to be a little bit surprised. You know, Mysterio needs to have an in. And his in the trailer is, I'm here to help save the world. But what he's not telling everybody is that the problem that he's fighting against may be partially also his own creation. And here's why. Quentin Beck was originally a brilliant engineer. He was an inventor. He has totally extreme advanced knowledge of mechanics and robotics and chemistry. But he's also a trained hypnotist. Beck is a guy who is a master at creating visual special effects. And in the comics, he used his expertise as a stuntman in mechanical work and special effects and in makeup to trick people into thinking that monsters and beasts were attacking them. And originally in the 1960s, Mysterio was a character who he created stunt props that would be used in maybe like movie sets, but they seemed more lifelike than a movie set. So Spider-Man many times had to deal with the visual effects that Mysterio is putting out. Well, over time, Mysterio became more than just a guy who could create special effects. He was also a guy who could manipulate people's minds as a hypnotist and as basically a mind warper of reality. Even though he's not really changing reality, he's just changing the reality that you perceive. Which is part of the reason why that at times he also worked with the X-Men's villains, because one of the things that the villains such as Mr. Sinister, the X-Men were trying to do is try to take the abilities of Charles Xavier and Jean Grey out of play because they were both telepaths and psychics. So Mysterio is great at manipulating people. He's great at creating illusions. And you see in the movie, he's flying around and fighting all these beasts and all these monsters. But there's a possibility that those beasts and those monsters are of his own creation. And that's something that Nick Fury, Spider-Man, everyone's going to have to deal with and learn over time. Also, Mysterio was a member of the original Sinister Six. For those who don't know, the Sinister Six is one of the oldest group of villains of Spider-Man. It was Doc Ock, Sandman, Kraven the Hunter, Vulture, Electro, and Mysterio. We kind of got given a preview at the end of the first Spider-Man movie that Michael Keaton's villain character, the Vulture, was working with a potential Spider-Man villain in prison known as Scorpion. There's been numerous reiterations and versions of the Sinister Six over the years, but basically it's always been a group of Spider-Man villains, and Mysterio, the majority of the time, has been a member of the major six Spider-Man villains. The fact that he is a longtime Spider-Man villain and the fact that he has a connection to the X-Men tells us a couple things. One, Marvel is exploring an aspect of villains they haven't done before, which is the manipulation that villains can have on characters. And it's not just a comic book theory. It's a long-standing theory of you think someone's your friend, they turn out to be the enemy. And we haven't seen it on this type of scale because I think Marvel has tried very hard to be as grounded and as real-world based as possible. Also in the trailer, Mysterio turns to Spider-Man and says, "We don't have a hero like you on my Earth," which opens the door for the most important thing to come out of the Spider-Man Far From Home trailer. Ladies and gentlemen, say hello to the multiverse. That's right. Nick Fury explains in the trailer that Endgame ripped a hole in reality and that Mysterio is from another Earth. Significant for two reasons. One, this is the easiest way to introduce the Fantastic Four and the X-Men into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Oh, they're from a different Earth. That's why they weren't here all along. Number two, this allows Marvel to basically do whatever they want and either explain anything into and out of existence at any time they want. At any time, they can turn around and say, this hero or this villain is from an alternate reality. Or they can say, well, the reason why this hero is no longer involved in Earth activity is because they went to a different Earth. They can literally introduce and dismiss any character or villain anytime they want by just setting them off world. And it's a very easy way for Marvel to play around with reality, because when you have a reality where anything is possible, it allows you to be much more experimental and much less stringent when it comes to the rules you've placed upon yourself. Furthermore, what Marvel is also doing is they're capitalizing on the conversation between the Ancient One and Hulk, Bruce Banner, in Endgame. Remember, in Endgame, when Hulk goes back into the past, he runs into the Ancient One. They have a conversation about changing the timeline. And she explains to him that every change of the timeline creates an alternate reality, a different history, a different version of reality that keeps on going outside of that person's own reality. So there is a reality where Thanos didn't collect the stones and didn't snap his fingers. That reality would be the reality where Thanos came from when the Avengers eventually conquered him at the end of Endgame. Remember, when Iron Man snaps his fingers and Thanos, all of his forces go away, that's a reality where Thanos was on his way to collecting the stones. Well, in that reality, he doesn't. In that reality, Ronan gets his hand on the Power Stone, but Thanos doesn't. So what happens to the world when that happens? Also, if Quentin Beck is from an alternate reality, that means there's a version of him potentially in this reality. So does Spider-Man and Nick Fury run into the Quentin Beck of the main Marvel Cinematic Universe planet, or is that Quentin Beck dead or not existent for some reason? There's a lot of questions to be answered when it comes to what Mysterio's true intentions are, because we know from the comics and we know from history that Mysterio is a character who purposely goes out of his way to manipulate people and to try to paint things to make it look like he's not really as much of a bad guy as everybody says he is, whether it's for research purposes, whether it's for I'm trying to do the right thing, or I'm working on an experiment, or I have something else. He always has some ulterior motive going on. A couple other things to note from the trailer. As I mentioned to you in previous podcasts, Nick Fury is the new shepherd of the MCU. It's no longer Robert Downey Jr. appearing in every movie. Remember, Robert Downey Jr. was at the end of the Incredible Hulk movie. He was in the Spider-Man movie. He has been in multiple Marvel Cinematic movies as a connection between all the movies, just like Natasha Romanoff was as well. Remember, if you go back through all the Marvel movies from 2008 to 2019, outside of the Guardians of the Galaxy, every single Marvel movie either has Black Widow or a Stark in it, or the movie mentions them. Like Ant-Man mentions Stark a couple different times. There's always a connection between all the films, and it looks like Fury is going to continue that tradition of being the connecting thread of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and also as a new mentor for Spider-Man, harkening back to the fact that Spider-Man is still a teenager, and he technically is without a father figure. I think in some ways they're going to capitalize on the movie, but the fact that Peter Parker viewed Tony Stark a bit as a father figure, and as someone who lost his parents and now he loses Tony Stark, this hits him hard. This is tough. This is not something that he wants to have to go through emotionally again. And Nick Fury, he's not really in the parenthood business. He's in the save the world and ask questions later business. So Nick Fury may be thrust into a role of mentorship that he really wasn't planning to do. Also, you see Happy Hogan taking a more extensive role in Peter Parker's life now that there's no more Tony Stark involved. There's also been implied there may be a relationship developing between Happy Hogan and Peter Parker's Aunt May, who is played by Marissa Tomei, which that would be a fun twist on things. At the end of the day, Spider-Man in the MCU is purposely being done in a way that is not in line with pure Spider-Man canon, unlike the other MCU movies. I think there's a couple reasons why they're doing that. One, because of the fact that Marvel is trying to differentiate themselves from the other Sony versions of Spider-Man. So they don't want another Mary Jane or another Gwen Stacy who looks just like Kirsten Dunst or Emma Stone. They're trying to create a world where Spider-Man exists in that is different than those worlds, because if Marvel is going to go on with their own storylines, they have to differentiate and to separate Spider-Man from. That's why they've used villains that were not used in those previous movies. Notice that you haven't seen Green Goblin, you haven't seen Doc Ock, you haven't seen villains of Spider-Man that have been in previous movies. And that actually excites me on one hand. I'm excited that we get a chance to see Spider-Man deal with villains on the big screen that we haven't seen yet. You know, it's refreshing that it's not just, oh, okay, here we go, Doc Ock, Green Goblin, Electro, we've seen all this before. No, they're going a little bit different. You know, they're giving you Vulture, they're giving you Mysterio, they're hinting at Scorpion and Shocker, and I'm hoping that means we get Kraven the Hunter, because we haven't gotten that villain either, and that's a lot of fun as well. I can totally see Marvel turning Kraven Hunter into a guy who takes himself way too seriously and becomes like a joke bit of a plot line throughout the movie when he's introduced, because that's totally how he is portrayed in the comics, especially in multiple comics when Spider-Man doesn't understand why Kraven is so serious about everything and he's out there, you know, cracking jokes. The other thing with the multiverse is this is going to be the easiest way for Marvel to continue with their current movie schedule while using the properties they got from Fox. I mentioned the fact that Mysterio does have a connection to the X-Men. There's that one aspect. Another aspect that's to be remembered is Marvel has already announced that they are disbanding Gambit. Not deleting it, not canceling it. They're just stopping it. Now, the Gambit movie starring Channing Tatum was supposed to come out either in 2020, 2021. That movie has been removed from release and production schedules. Not that the movie won't happen, but what Marvel is trying to do is they're trying to move as much time between Fox's version of X-Men and their version of X-Men as quickly as possible. Remember, this summer is the final mutant movies under the Fox banner, particularly the Dark Phoenix saga, which will be the final movie of that version of the X-Men. Marvel wants to create enough distance between those versions of their star mutant characters and their own version they're going to introduce. I think another aspect of what Marvel is doing is when they have a multiverse, there's only one character that they've confirmed they're keeping from the Fox Studios. and that's Ryan Reynolds' Deadpool. And Deadpool and Spider-Man have a history together. So what better way for you to explain Deadpool in the MCU is if he comes from an alternate planet, another version of Earth. Furthermore, when you have a multiverse, it'll be a lot easier to explain a villain like Kang the Conqueror, or a villain that is someone who does not just exist on one planet. It's someone who exists beyond this Earth. So Spider-Man Far From Home, coming out this summer. The trailer is fascinating. It's got a lot of depth, and it's got a lot of information given to us now that we didn't have before about the future of the MCU. It only furthers my belief that we're going to see Kang the Conqueror at some point. It only furthers my belief that we're going to see Namor and Atuma, potentially either one or both, at some point in the MCU's future. Furthermore, we know and been confirmed that with Black Panther 2, Doctor Strange 2, The Eternals, Guardians of the Galaxy 3, there's only a handful of open slots for Marvel to have any more movies beyond 2020, as Disney has announced a revamped movie release schedule. There are specifically a handful of dates that look like it could be there for an upcoming big Marvel movie. And I'm going to make the assumption right now, in May of 2019, that one of those movies is going to be a New Avengers. Whether they call themselves New Avengers or they call themselves some other name, there's going to be a new Marvel team-up film, and I wouldn't be surprised if that comes maybe around 2022. Topic number 3 on episode 42 of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. It's a bit tongue-in-cheek, but we got to talk about Klay Thompson. Klay Thompson, the star shooting guard for the Golden State Warriors, has been in the news a lot this week, and it touches on both of my favorite topics, sports and comic book movies. Let's get to the serious stuff first. 2 reports come out in the same week, both from people at ESPN, with 2 totally different perspectives on Klay Thompson. Adrian Wojnarowski was reporting earlier in the week, and Brian Windhorst was reporting the week before, that Klay Thompson is probably going to stay in Golden State as long as he gets a max year contract. Well, Stephen A. Smith on ESPN reporting that Klay Thompson isn't happy, that his number isn't being called enough, and he's tired of getting the crumbs left behind. We've heard multiple rumors over the last couple years about Klay Thompson's future in Golden State. There has been speculation that he's happy in Golden State, doesn't want to go anywhere. There's other speculation that he would want to leave and he would want to go to the Lakers just like his father did. There's been rumors that Klay is happy with his role, he's not happy with his role. And I'm here to tell you that you have to consider the source of the information. I don't just mean the person reporting. I mean, who is the source of Adrian Wojnarowski, Stephen A. Smith, Brian Windhorst? All 3 men have a track record of being right about things, just as much as they have a track record of not getting things right. Now, Adrian Wojnarowski is basically the Adam Schefter of the NBA. He gets pretty much all of his reporting right, and he's as much as a non-analysis, hard news reporting media guy you're going to get. While Brian Windhorst and Stephen A. Smith are much closer to the analyst as well as reporter side of the spectrum. Not that any of them are wrong, but I'm going to give you my own version of events. I still contend that Kevin Durant is going to leave Golden State. As of right now, here in May 2019, I believe Kevin Durant is leaving for either the Knicks or the Nets because he has multiple business operations set up in New York. He has spent a lot of time in the offseason and during the NBA season doing things that have to do with the business side of his life. Whether it's doing that ESPN Plus show, whether that's focusing on his charities and his business operations, Kevin Durant is showing you, similar to how LeBron did, that He has interests outside of basketball, and those interests outside of basketball are going to influence what he does with his basketball career. So I genuinely believe Kevin Durant is leaving, whether it's New York, the Nets, to go to the Nets or the Knicks. If I was going to say there's a third team that could just spice things up, don't discount the Miami Heat going out and get a big free agent, whether that's Durant or Kyrie Irving or some sort of combination of free agents. That's conversation for another day. I don't genuinely think Klay Thompson is actively looking to leave. I do believe that he is frustrated with his situation in Golden State. I think the Kevin Durant experiment has run on a long time at this point. And I call it an experiment because at the end of the day, having that many scorers and that many shooters and that much offensive talent on one basketball team is not a long-term solution because those guys didn't all grow up together. They didn't all develop together. They weren't raised to the organization together. One of the reasons why Klay, Steph, Draymond, the three of those guys work is because they all came up through the Warriors organization with each other, around each other in that culture. Kevin Durant's an outsider. And Kevin Durant, he is a superstar. He's arguably one of the 2 or 3 best players in the NBA. He's going to demand his touches. He's going to demand his shots. And that takes away opportunities from Steph and Klay. Now, Steph is as unselfish as it gets. I think it gets overlooked sometimes that Steph Curry is probably the most unselfish superstar not named LeBron James in the entire NBA. The guy does not care about the spotlight. He just wants to go out and play basketball, win games, and have fun and do his thing. And his interests off the court are basically his family. He's not a dude who's looking out to build himself a media or business empire. He's not out there trying to get the biggest shoe deal in the history of mankind. The dude loves the game of basketball. He's passionate. He cares about people. He does a lot of charity work, but he's not focused on just seeing how much money he can make, on and off the court. Not saying that making money is a bad thing, but I'm just saying that his mentality is different than some of these other guys. So for him, Durant getting there didn't flinch him, bother him one bit. I think for Klay, he feels like that he's being overlooked. And because he's had a couple injuries over the last couple of years, because he's had a couple of monster games, then 2 games later, he gets pretty much overlooked at times in the offense. I think he feels like Durant is taking touches away from him. With Durant leaving, the problem may solve itself. If Klay Thompson is unhappy and frustrated with the situation with the offense in Golden State and Durant leaves and he gets the opportunity to stay, he's, I think, most likely going to stay. I don't think this idea that, people have been theorizing for 2 years now. Well, what if Klay left in free agency to join the Sixers or join LeBron in Los Angeles or join Kawhi with the Clippers? Or what if he goes east and joins on a superstar with the Knicks or the Nets? Or what if he goes to Boston? All this conjecture is basically people playing video game logic with people's lives. What's important to Klay Thompson? We don't really know. He basically speaks about 5 more words per day than Kawhi Leonard does. Klay Thompson is not a very vocal guy. He's not out there, saying all kinds of crazy stuff. He does talk more than Kawhi, but he doesn't talk as much as Durant does. He doesn't talk as much as Steph does. We don't know as much about him as we know about these other guys, about their interests and their desires and what's important to them. I think for Klay, it's not all about the money. I think it's about what's best for him on and off the court, just as an athlete. And I don't know if leaving Golden State is the best thing for him. And I think he understands that. I don't think he's naive of that. I don't think he's that concept is beyond him or, something that's irrational at all. Now, what is irrational is the other thing I told you about that we would get to, which is slightly less serious. So a news report came out that Klay Thompson went and saw Avengers Endgame, and after about an hour, he left the movie, and he was bored because he said the storyline in the movie didn't interest him. And it's getting a lot of publicity because it's a big name star athlete who didn't like Avengers Endgame. And, it's been an opportunity to fuel the negative people out there who hate comic book movies to say, see, I told you the movie was flawed. See, I told you that it's not that great. See, I told you that it's... Stop. For all of you people out there, and you're probably not even listening to this podcast, but I'll still speak to those people. Klay Thompson probably doesn't like the Marvel movies in general. He probably just had the opportunity to go see the movie, probably for free, because he's a star, and he knows people, and he lives in California. It doesn't mean the movie was bad. 200 million people don't go watch a movie, and the movie breaks every record along the way, grossing over $2 billion at box office, and one guy doesn't like it, and all of a sudden, let's have an opportunity to talk garbage and trash the biggest blockbuster movie in the history of movies, potentially. There's this attitude in the world that comic book movies are, see, they're not great because they're not great cinematic masterpieces. Look, it's an action movie. It's meant to be a little fantastical, and for an hour or two, or in the case of Endgame, 3, over a couple hours, get you away from the world. It's an escape. You know, when I was a kid, and for a lot of you out there who were kids who read comics, you weren't reading comics for the great writing. In fact, there were numerous times you read a comic and you were like, wow, this is really, really poor writing. This is really poor, planning by the writers and the comic book artists. Or there were times you'd read a comic and you realize, wait a minute, there were 3 different artists on this comic, and all of a sudden the same character has a different shape of eyes from one page to the next, or Wolverine's costume is a different color from one scene to the next. Look, comics are an imperfect science, okay? They were never meant to be a novel masterpiece. No one's ever going to confuse Steve Ditko and Stan Lee's writing of Spider-Man with C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia, or H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, or any of the famous books over the years that you may have read that are historical classics. Comic books were not meant to be this great film. It was meant to be an escape for people and entertain people. So, yes, if you're comparing Avengers Endgame to A Beautiful Mind with Russell Crowe, or you're comparing it to a Denzel Washington great film like Man on Fire, or if you want to go farther back and you want to compare it to The Godfather or to Scarface or numerous movies over the years. I mean, for goodness sake, The Maltese Falcon, okay? I'm sorry, but these are not meant to be masterpieces. They're not going to win Academy Awards. So if you're treating them like those movies, then you miss the whole point of the movie. So anybody who criticizes Avengers for, I didn't get the story or I didn't get the plot, then the movie wasn't for you anyway, because you're looking for something that's not there. At the end of the day, the Marvel movies are more substantive than 70% of the movies that come out of Hollywood and independent films. But because they involve comic book characters, people want to automatically dismiss them. I'm not mad at Klay for walking out of the movie. I just think it's silly he went to see it and didn't realize what he was walking into. That's just goofiness. Thanks for listening to this edition of the Mutant Blitz Podcast. If you have any thoughts or comments on the podcast, you can drop it down in the comment box section below. Be sure you hit the like button and subscribe so you catch each episode of the podcast where I give you my perspective on the world of sports and comic books. I'm Josh Hennig, and I'll catch you next time right here for the Mutant Blitz Podcast.